The water reached her chest now, warm as blood and dark with jungle silt, and still Gunnery Sergeant Celeste Mwangi did not move. Her eye remained pressed to the scope, her finger resting beside the trigger guard, her breathing slow and measured despite the rain hammering the surface inches above her head. 52 hours she had been in this position. 52 hours of monsoon fury, of rising water, of a voice on the radio telling her to abort. But Celeste Mwangi had not come this far to let a little water stop her. 52 hours earlier, the briefing room at FOB Tempest had smelled of mildew and diesel fuel, the way every forward operating base in Southeast Asia smelled during monsoon season. Mwangi stood at the back of the room, her spotter Corporal Dante Okonkwo beside her, watching Colonel Patricia Aldridge pull up satellite imagery on the rain-streaked screen. The target's name was Maxim Volkov, Russian national, arms dealer, responsible for funneling weapons to insurgent groups across 3 countries. He would surface at a coastal compound in 36 hours, staying for approximately 6 before disappearing again into the network of shell companies and private aircraft that kept him alive. 6 hours, the colonel said. That was their window. Mwangi felt the attention in the room shift before she heard the voice. Master Sergeant Bryce Kellerman spoke from his seat near the front, not bothering to stand or to look at her when he addressed the colonel. With respect, he said, his voice carrying the particular weight of a man who had never meant those words in his life. The conditions we are looking at make this shot borderline impossible. Sustained winds, zero visibility, and that is before we factor in the storm surge projections. He paused, and Mwangi knew what was coming. I'm not sure Sergeant Mwangi has the operational depth for this particular mission, Kellerman continued. Perhaps someone with more experience in adverse conditions should take primary. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Maybe you have served in conditions where the weather itself became the enemy. Colonel Aldridge's expression did not change. She had commanded joint task forces for 15 years and had heard every variation of this particular objection. Gunnery Sergeant Mwangi has 47 confirmed kills across 4 deployments, she said. She graduated top of her class at Scout Sniper School in conditions that washed out half the candidates. She is primary on this mission. Her eyes moved to Kellerman. You will serve as mission advisor, Master Sergeant. I trust that will not be a problem. It was not a question. Kellerman's jaw tightened, but he nodded. The briefing continued, but Mwangi barely heard it. She was already calculating distances, wind patterns, the particular way monsoon rain would affect bullet trajectory over 1,400 meters. Beside her, Okonkwo caught her eye and offered a slight nod. He knew what she was thinking. He always did. After the briefing, they checked their gear in the armory while rain drummed against the metal roof. Okonkwo was young, 26, but he had been her spotter for 3 deployments, and she trusted him completely. When a supply sergeant had questioned his competence last year, citing his accent, his background, Mwangi had walked into the company commander's office and made it clear that Corporal Okonkwo was the finest spotter she had ever worked with, and that anyone who suggested otherwise could take it up with her directly. No one had. You know Kellerman is going to make this difficult, Okonkwo said, his voice low as he waterproofed their communications equipment. Mwangi checked the action on her rifle, feeling the familiar weight of it in her hands. Kellerman has been making things difficult since I qualified, she said. Has not stopped me yet. Okonkwo smiled, but there was worry in his eyes. The monsoon is real, though. The projections show potential flooding at both hide sites. Then we adapt. Mwangi set down the rifle and looked at him. My father used to take me diving off the Carolina coast. Taught me to hold my breath for 4 minutes, to find stillness even when the current tried to pull me apart. She touched the waterproof pouch at her chest, where she kept his photograph. Water does not scare me, Dante. It is where I learned to be patient. The insertion boat waited at the dock, its engines rumbling against the storm. Lieutenant Commander Town Nguyen stood at the helm, his SEAL team already aboard. He watched Mwangi approach with the assessing gaze of a man who had worked with every kind of operator and had learned to reserve judgment until he saw them perform. Gunnery Sergeant, he said, my team will get you to the insertion point. What happens after that is on you. Understood, Commander. The boat pulled away from the dock as the first heavy band of the monsoon swept across the base. Mwangi sat in the stern, rain streaming down her face, and thought about her father, about the day he had drowned, and the promise she had made herself as she held his hand beneath the waves. She would never be helpless in the water again. The jungle swallowed them whole, and somewhere ahead, the target was waiting. The river moved like something alive beneath them, swollen with monsoon runoff and hungry for anything foolish enough to fall into its grasp. Mwangi kept her balance in the center of the boat, watching the jungle slide past on either side, walls of green so thick they seemed to breathe. Nguyen navigated with the confidence of a man who had run these waters before. His SEAL team sat in practiced silence, their eyes scanning the banks for threats that probably were not there, but might be. That was the difference between professionals and amateurs. Professionals prepared for the threats that might be. 30 minutes upriver, Nguyen cut the engines and let the current hold them steady. "From here we go on foot," he said. "The compound is 6 clicks northeast. Your hide site is marked on the ridge above it." Mwangi nodded and gathered her gear. The rifle case weighed 40 pounds with ammunition and optics, but she had carried heavier loads over worse terrain. Okonkwo moved beside her, his own pack stuffed with spotting equipment and enough supplies for 72 hours in position. One of the SEALs, a petty officer with a scar across his jaw, watched Mwangi step onto the muddy bank. She felt his assessment and ignored it. She had been assessed by men her entire career. The only answer that mattered was the one she gave through the scope. The jungle closed around them immediately. Rain fell in sheets that found every gap in their gear, every seam that was not perfectly sealed. Within minutes, Mwangi was soaked to the skin, and she welcomed it. Discomfort was just information. It told her she was still alive, still moving, still in the fight. They reached a river, crossing an hour into the march. The water ran chest-deep and fast, churned brown with debris from upstream. 2 of the SEALs hesitated at the bank, calculating the risk. Mwangi did not hesitate. She stepped into the current and felt it grab her legs, felt the power of the water trying to pull her downstream. But she had grown up in water like this. Her father had taught her to read currents the way other children learn to read books. She found the path, the place where the river's strength became her ally instead of her enemy, and she crossed in smooth, diagonal strides that brought her to the far bank without a wasted movement. Okonkwo followed her line exactly. He had learned to trust her instincts in water. Nguyen watched from the original bank, and when he crossed, he took the same path she had found. On the far side, he caught her eye and gave a slight nod. It was not much, but from a SEAL team leader, it meant something. They pushed on through the darkness, navigating by GPS and the occasional flash of lightning that turned the jungle into a photograph of shadows and rain. Mwangi felt the exhaustion in her legs, but pushed it aside. There would be time to rest when they reached the hide site. There would be time to rest when the mission was complete. The memory came without warning, the way it always did. She was 19 again, diving with her father off the Outer Banks. He had wanted to show her a wreck he had discovered, a fishing boat that had gone down in a storm decades earlier. The water was cold that day, colder than it should have been, and the current had shifted while they were down. She remembered the look in his eyes when he realized his regulator had failed. Remembered the way he had grabbed her hand, not in panic, but in farewell. He had been a marine biologist, a man who had spent his life studying the ocean, and he had known immediately that he was not going to surface. Mwangi had tried to share her air with him, had tried to drag him toward the light above. But the current was too strong, and his hand had grown slack in hers, and she had held him as he drowned. Held him until her own lungs screamed for air and survival instinct finally overrode everything else. She had surfaced alone, had floated on the waves, and screamed into the empty sky until the Coast Guard found her. The therapist at Camp Lejeune had called it survivor's guilt, had suggested that Mwangi's drive to become a sniper, to master the impossible shot, was compensation for the save she could not make. Maybe that was true. But Mwangi preferred to think of it differently. Her father had taught her to find stillness in chaos, to breathe when breathing seemed impossible. Every shot she made honored that teaching. Every mission she completed was a promise kept. The ridge appeared through the rain just before dawn, a dark mass rising above the jungle canopy. Hindsight Alpha was exactly where the satellite imagery had shown it, a natural depression in the rock face that offered cover and a clear line of sight to the compound below. Nguyen's team would hold a support position half a click back, ready to assist with extraction once the shot was taken. He clasped Mwangi's hand before they separated. "Good hunting, Gunnery Sergeant." She and Okonkwo climbed the final 100 meters alone, hauling their gear up slick rock faces and through vegetation that grabbed at them like desperate hands. By the time they reached the hide site, the first gray light of morning was seeping through the storm clouds. Okonkwo began setting up the spotting scope while Mwangi positioned her rifle. Below them, through the rain, she could just make out the coastal compound where Volkov would arrive in 30 hours. 1,400 meters. In good conditions, it would be a challenging shot. In these conditions, with the wind and rain, it would be nearly impossible. Nearly impossible was not the same as impossible. She settled into position, feeling the rock beneath her, the rain on her back, the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. Somewhere behind them, back at FOB Tempest, Kellerman was watching the weather reports and waiting for her to fail. He would be waiting a long time. The first night in the hide passed in increments of misery. Rain hammered the improvised cover they had stretched above their position, finding gaps and seams and pooling in every depression. By midnight, Mwangi was lying in 2 inches of water. By dawn it was 4. Okonkwo maintained the watch while she caught fragments of sleep, his eye pressed to the spotting scope even when visibility dropped to near zero. They worked in shifts, speaking only when necessary, conserving energy for the long wait ahead. This was the part of sniper work that movies never showed. The hours of stillness, of discomfort, of watching nothing happen while your body slowly surrendered to the environment. The radio crackled at 0600. Mwangi recognized Kellerman's voice before he identified himself. That particular combination of authority and condescension that he had perfected over 15 years. Alpha 1, this is Tempest Actual. Weather projections have worsened. Command is requesting status update on mission viability. Mwangi keyed her mic. Tempest Actual, Alpha 1. Position is holding. Target window unchanged. Mission remains viable. A pause. Then Kellerman's voice again, and she could hear the satisfaction buried beneath the professional concern. Copy that, Alpha 1. Be advised, storm surge projections now show potential flooding at your position. Recommend you consider relocation to secondary site or extraction. Okonkwo looked at her, water dripping from the brim of his boonie cap. He knew what she knew. Kellerman was not concerned about their safety. He was building a paper trail, documenting his warnings so that when the mission failed, the blame would fall squarely on her shoulders. Negative, Tempest. Mwangi kept her voice flat, emotionless. Current position offers optimal sightlines. We'll reassess if conditions change. Alpha 1 out. She switched off the radio before Kellerman could respond. The morning brought a brief clearing, the rain easing to a drizzle that felt almost gentle after the night's assault. Mwangi used the window to study the compound below, memorizing the layout, the patrol patterns, the probable locations where Volkov might appear. The main building was a colonial-era villa, white walls stained gray by decades of tropical humidity. A helicopter pad sat on the eastern edge of the property, and guards moved along the perimeter in predictable rotations. There Okonkwo said, adjusting his scope. Second floor balcony. That is where he will meet with his buyers. Best view of the water, most impressive backdrop. A man like Volkov, he wants to show off. Mwangi studied the balcony. 1,400 meters, elevated position, partial cover from the roofline. It would require a precise calculation of angle and trajectory, but it was doable. In these conditions, with the wind, shear, and rain, it would require perfection. She had given the Marine Corps nothing less for 12 years. She was not about to start now. The radio crackled again, but this time it was Colonel Aldridge's voice. Alpha 1, Tempest 6 Actual. I have been monitoring the weather reports. What is your honest assessment? Mwangi appreciated that Aldridge asked for honesty. Too many officers wanted only confirmation of what they already believed. Colonel, conditions are challenging but manageable. My primary concern is the flooding at this position. If water levels continue rising, I may need to relocate to the secondary site. The secondary site, Aldridge said, that is the mangrove position. Lower elevation, closer to the compound, but significantly more exposed to storm surge. Yes, ma'am, but it is also 500 meters closer to the target. In these conditions, every meter matters. Aldridge was quiet for a moment. And if the surge comes while you are in that position? Mwangi looked at Okonkwo, then at the water already pooling around their gear. Then I will adapt, Colonel. I have trained for aquatic operations. If necessary, I can take the shot from a partially submerged position. The silence on the radio stretched long enough that Mwangi wondered if the connection had dropped. Then Aldridge spoke again, her voice carrying something that might have been respect or might have been concern. Understood, Alpha 1. You have my confidence. But I want contingency plans for extraction if conditions become untenable. Tempest 6 out. Okonkwo waited until the radio was silent before speaking. Partially submerged position? Celeste, that is not a contingency plan. That is a suicide note. Mwangi allowed herself a small smile. My father once told me that the ocean does not care if you are afraid of it. It only cares if you understand it. She checked the seals on her rifle case, ensuring the weapon remained dry despite the water creeping into their hide. I understand water, Dante. I have understood it my whole life. He shook his head, but did not argue. He had seen her do things that other snipers called impossible, had watched her make shots in conditions that should have defeated any marksman. If she said she could shoot from underwater, he was not going to bet against her. The afternoon brought fresh misery. The rain returned with renewed fury, and the water in their position rose from inches to nearly a foot. Mwangi felt it seeping through her gear, cold despite the tropical heat, persistent as death. She maintained her position at the scope, watching the compound, waiting for any sign of early arrival. At 1600, a radio intercept from Nguyen's team confirmed what they already knew. Volkov's helicopter was en route. Estimated arrival in 20 hours. 20 hours. Mwangi looked at the water rising around her, at the sky that showed no sign of mercy, at the compound below where a monster would soon arrive to sell weapons that would kill innocent people. 20 hours, and she would end him. Behind her, unheard and unseen, the monsoon gathered its strength for the surge that would change everything. The storm surge warning came at 0300, cutting through the darkness like a blade. Nguyen's voice was tight with urgency as he relayed the updated projections. Alpha 1, be advised. Meteorological data shows surge event in approximately 10 hours. Your position will be fully submerged. Recommend immediate relocation. Mwangi was already moving, her mind calculating options, even as her body responded to the threat. The water in their hide had reached 18 inches, and she could feel the pressure of more coming, the weight of the monsoon bearing down on the ridge like a living thing. Okonkwo broke down the spotting equipment with practiced efficiency. Where do we go? Back to extraction point? No. Mwangi pulled up the terrain map on her waterproof tablet, studying the contours she had memorized before insertion. Hide site Bravo. The mangrove position. He stopped packing and stared at her. Celeste, that site is lower than this one. If Alpha floods, Bravo will be underwater. Alpha will be completely submerged, she said. Bravo will only be partially flooded, and it is 500 meters closer to the target. At 900 meters, I can compensate for the conditions. At 1400, in this weather, I am shooting blind. Okonkwo opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He had learned years ago that arguing with Mwangi when she had made a tactical decision was like arguing with the tide. You might make noise, but you would not change anything. They moved out within 15 minutes, leaving nothing behind but footprints that the rain erased within moments. The descent was treacherous. The jungle floor transformed into a network of streams and waterfalls that grabbed at their boots and threatened to sweep them off the ridge. Twice Mwangi caught Okonkwo as he slipped, her grip iron-strong despite the exhaustion pulling at her muscles. The radio crackled. Kellerman's voice again, and this time he did not bother hiding his satisfaction. Alpha 1, Tempest Actual. I am showing you moving away from primary position. Confirm you're proceeding to extraction point. Mwangi keyed her mic without slowing her pace. Negative, Tempest. Relocating to secondary hide site. Mission continues. A pause. Alpha 1, I am ordering you to extract. Conditions have exceeded operational parameters. This mission is no longer viable. She felt the anger rise in her chest, hot and familiar. Kellerman did not have the authority to order her extraction. Only Colonel Aldridge could make that call, and they both knew it. He was bluffing, trying to get her to abandon the mission so he could claim she had failed under pressure. Tempest Actual, she said, her voice flat as gunmetal. You are not in my chain of command for this operation. All tactical decisions go through Tempest 6. Alpha 1 out. She switched frequencies before he could respond, connecting directly to Nguyen's team. Papa 1, Alpha 1. We are relocating to Bravo position, requesting you maintain support posture. Nguyen's response was immediate. Copy, Alpha 1. We have eyes on your movement. Be advised that mangrove position is going to be ugly when the surge hits. I know. Mwangi ducked under a fallen tree, water streaming down her face. But ugly is not the same as impossible. They reached Hide Site Bravo as the first gray light of dawn seeped through the storm clouds. The position was everything the satellite imagery had promised and everything Mwangi had feared. A natural depression in the mangrove roots offered concealment and a clear sight line to the compound, but the ground was already saturated. Water pooled around their ankles the moment they settled into position. 900 meters, Okonkwo said, his scope trained on the compound below. Better angle on the balcony, too. If he shows himself, you'll have a clean shot. If the water does not swallow us first. Mwangi began waterproofing her rifle, applying sealant to every joint and seam with the meticulous care of a surgeon. The weapon was her life, her purpose, the instrument through which she kept her promises. She would not let it fail her now. The memory surfaced as she worked, rising unbidden from the depths of her mind. She was 12 years old, standing on the deck of her father's research boat, watching him prepare his diving equipment. He had explained the physics to her that day, the way light bent when it passed from air to water, the way a target would appear to be in a different position than it actually was. If you ever have to aim at something underwater, he had said, you have to trust the math, not your eyes. Your eyes will lie to you. The math never lies. She had not understood then why he was teaching her such things. Now, watching the water rise around her position, she understood perfectly. He had been preparing her for this moment. For every moment. Okonkwo finished setting up the spotting scope and turned to look at her. His face was drawn with exhaustion and something else, something that looked like fear. Celeste, he said quietly, if this position floods completely, if you have to take the shot from underwater, I cannot spot for you. I am not trained for that. I cannot hold my breath like you can. I know. Mwangi met his eyes. If it comes to that, I need you to move to higher ground. Find a position where you can monitor the compound and call the target window. You want me to leave you alone in a flooded hole with a rifle and hope you can make an impossible shot. She allowed herself a small smile. When you say it like that, it sounds crazy. It is crazy. Maybe. Mwangi looked out at the compound, at the balcony where Volkov would stand in less than 18 hours. But crazy is not the same as impossible either. The water continued to rise, and somewhere back at FOB Tempest, Kellerman was already drafting his report on her failure. The water reached her knees by noon, and still Colonel Aldridge had not responded to Kellerman's extraction order. Mwangi took that as confirmation that the colonel trusted her judgment, or at least trusted it more than Kellerman's transparent attempt to sabotage the mission. Small victories mattered in situations like this. They were the only things that kept you sane. The radio crackled at 12:30. Aldridge's voice, calm and measured despite the static. Alpha 1, Tempest 6 Actual. I have reviewed the situation with Master Sergeant Kellerman. He has expressed concerns about your current position. Mwangi kept her eye on the scope, watching the compound through curtains of rain. I am aware of his concerns, Colonel. I want to hear your assessment directly. Can you complete this mission? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with everything it implied. Mwangi thought about the water rising around her legs, the storm surge building offshore, the target who would arrive in less than 12 hours. She thought about Kellerman back at Tempest, waiting for her to admit defeat. She thought about her father, holding her hand as the current pulled him down. Colonel, she said, I am the only one who can complete this mission. Anyone else would have extracted hours ago. I am still here because I know what I am capable of, and I know what this shot requires. Give me the window, and I will give you Volkov. Silence. Then Aldrich spoke again, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost like respect. You have 18 hours, Gunnery Sergeant. If conditions deteriorate beyond operational parameters before then, you extract. No arguments. Understood, Colonel. Alpha 1 out. Okonkwo let out a breath he had been holding. She backed you. She gave me a chance. Mwangi adjusted her position, feeling the water swirl around her thighs. That is all I have ever asked for. The afternoon brought a brief respite from the rain, though the water continued to rise from the saturated ground. Mwangi used the time to reinforce their position, creating a platform of mangrove roots and salvage debris that would keep her rifle above water, even if she had to submerge. Okonkwo watched her work with growing unease. You are really planning for this, he said. You actually think you might have to shoot from underwater. I am planning for every possibility. Mwangi tested the stability of the platform, pressing down with her full weight. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. You know the drill. The drill does not usually involve drowning. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the fear beneath his professional composure. Okonkwo had been with her through 4 deployments, through firefights and ambushes and missions that had gone sideways in every possible way. She had never seen him scared like this. Dante, she said quietly, if you need to extract, I understand. This is beyond what anyone signed up for. He shook his head, anger flashing across his features. Do not insult me. I'm not leaving you alone out here. I just want you to understand what you are asking of yourself. I understand. Mwangi returned to her work, her hands steady despite the chill seeping into her bones. I have understood since I was 19 years old, floating in the Atlantic with my father's body sinking beneath me. I cannot save him. I cannot do anything but watch him die. She paused, her voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. I will never be helpless in the water again. Not ever. The silence that followed was broken only by the rain resuming its assault. Okonkwo did not speak, but he moved closer, positioning himself at her shoulder where a spotter belonged. Whatever came next, he would face it beside her. At 1600, the supply drone they had been expecting failed to arrive. Mwangi checked the schedule twice, confirmed the coordinates, and raised Nguyen on the radio. Papa 1, Alpha 1. We're showing no contact with resupply drone. Can you confirm status? Nguyen's response was tight, with barely contained anger. Alpha 1, stand by. The minutes stretched. The water crept higher, now brushing the bottom of Mwangi's tactical vest. Finally, Nguyen's voice returned, and what he said made her blood run cold. Alpha 1, I have confirmed with Tempest Logistics. Your resupply drone was redirected 2 hours ago. Authorization came from Master Sergeant Kellerman, citing safety concerns about drone operations in current weather conditions. Mwangi closed her eyes. The supplies on that drone included thermal blankets, additional ammunition, water purification tablets, and emergency rations. Without them, she and Okonkwo were operating on what they had carried in, which was enough for 72 hours under normal conditions. These were not normal conditions. Copy, Papa 1. She kept her voice level despite the rage building in her chest. What is our resupply alternative? There is not one. Nguyen's voice carried the weight of someone delivering a death sentence. Next available window is 48 hours out. You are on your own until then. Okonkwo met her eyes across the flooded hide, and she saw her own realization reflected there. Kellerman had not just tried to order her extraction. He had cut off their supplies, left them stranded in a flooding position with dwindling resources, and done it all through official channels that would be nearly impossible to challenge. He wanted her to fail. He needed her to fail, and he was willing to risk her life to make it happen. The water rose another inch, and Mwangi began to understand that she was fighting two enemies now. One was waiting at the compound below. The other was waiting at Tempest, watching the weather reports and smiling. Dawn of the third day broke gray and angry, the sky indistinguishable from the sea that seemed determined to swallow them whole. The water in their position had risen to Mwangi's waist, and every movement sent ripples across the surface that she had to consciously still before returning to her scope. 8 hours until target window. 8 hours until Volkov stepped onto that balcony and gave her the shot she had been waiting for. 8 hours, and the water showed no signs of stopping. Okonkwo had developed a tremor in his hand sometime during the night. Mwangi recognized the early signs of hypothermia despite the tropical climate. The constant immersion, the inability to dry out or warm up, was taking its toll. She watched him struggle to hold the spotting scope steady and made a decision she had been avoiding for hours. "Dante," she said, keeping her voice soft. "There's a rock formation 200 meters back, above the surge line. I need you to relocate there." He looked at her with bloodshot eyes. "No, that is not a request." Mwangi held his gaze, letting him see the steel beneath her calm exterior. "You are hypothermic. Your hands are shaking. If you stay here, you will be combat ineffective within 2 hours, and I need a spotter who can call my window. I am not leaving you alone in this. You are not leaving me." She gestured toward the higher ground. "You are repositioning to where you can actually do your job. I need eyes on that compound, and I need someone who can radio confirmation when Volkov appears. You cannot do that if you are unconscious." Okonkwo stared at her for a long moment, and she watched the war play out across his features. Pride against pragmatism, loyalty against logic. Finally, something in him broke, and he nodded. "If you die out here," he said, his voice rough, "I will never forgive you. Then I will have to stay alive." Mwangi allowed herself a small smile. "Go, Dante. Find high ground. Keep your radio dry and your eyes on that balcony." He gathered his gear slowly, reluctantly, pausing twice to look back at her. When he finally disappeared into the mangroves, Mwangi felt the silence close around her like a fist. She was alone now, alone in a flooded hole with a rifle and a mission and 8 hours to wait. She settled deeper into position, letting the water rise around her chest, and began her breathing exercises. The radio intercept came at 0900, relayed through Nguyen's team from their monitoring position. What Mwangi heard made her forget the cold, forget the water, forget everything except the rage that bloomed in her chest like a dark flower. "Alpha 1, Papa 1, we have intercepted communication from Tempest to an unsecured frequency. Someone at the FOB has transmitted a warning to the compound security team. They know there may be American sniper activity in the area." Mwangi's finger tightened on her rifle. "Say again, Papa 1. Nguyen's voice was tight, with barely suppressed fury. "Someone at Tempest warned Volkov's people. They are increasing security sweeps. They know someone is out here." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Kellerman had not just tried to order her extraction. He had not just cut off her supplies. He had actively compromised the mission, warning the target's security forces about her presence. This was not sabotage anymore. This was treason. "Do we have confirmation on the source?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Negative on official confirmation, but the transmission originated from the Tactical Operations Center. Only personnel with access are command staff and mission advisors. Kellerman. The name tasted like poison in her mouth. Mwangi calculated rapidly. If she extracted now, Volkov would know the threat had passed. He would complete his arms deal and disappear into the network of shadows that had protected him for years. Thousands of weapons would flow to insurgent groups across the region. People would die. Families would be destroyed. If she stayed, she faced a security team that knew she was coming, a position that was flooding by the minute, and no backup if things went wrong. It was not really a choice at all. Papa 1, Alpha 1. I am maintaining position. Mission continues. Nguyen was silent for a moment. Alpha 1, they will be actively hunting for you. Your window just got a lot smaller. Then I will have to be faster. Mwangi adjusted her scope, checking the compound through the rain. What is the status on Volkov's arrival? Helicopter is inbound. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. 6 hours. 6 hours to survive in a flooding position while enemy security swept the jungle looking for her. 6 hours until the man who had sold death to half the world stepped into her crosshairs. She could do this. She had to do this. At the TOC, Colonel Aldridge was receiving the same intercept. Mwangi did not know it yet, but the colonel was already moving, already piecing together the evidence that would destroy Kellerman's career and legacy. But that confrontation was hours away, and right now, in a flooded mangrove swamp with the water rising toward her shoulders, Mwangi had only one focus. The target, the shot, the promise she had made to herself when she was 19 years old, floating alone in the Atlantic. She would never be helpless again. Not in the water. Not anywhere. The water rose another inch, and Celeste Mwangi began preparing for the impossible. The water touched her shoulders now, warm and dark and patient. Mwangi had stopped shivering an hour ago, her body surrendering to the temperature, finding equilibrium with the flood that surrounded her. She kept her rifle elevated on the platform she had built, the barrel just inches above the waterline, her eye never leaving the scope. 4 hours until target window. For hours of stillness, of waiting, of becoming part of the swamp itself. The memory came to her unbidden, as memories often did in moments of extreme focus. She was 22 years old, lying in the mud at Quantico during the final phase of Scout Sniper School. The instructor standing over her was Master Sergeant Bryce Kellerman, and he was explaining in precise, clinical terms why she would never graduate. Women do not have the patience for this work, he had said, loud enough for the other candidates to hear. They do not have the physical stamina, the mental discipline, or the emotional stability. You might pass the written tests, corporal, but when it matters, when lives are on the line, you will break. She had not responded. She had simply stayed in position for another 6 hours, long after the other candidates had been dismissed, long after Kellerman himself had gone home for the night. When the sun rose the next morning, she was still there, still focused, still ready. Kellerman had signed her graduation certificate 3 weeks later. His hand had trembled with rage as he did it. Now, 13 years later, he was trying to destroy her one final time. But Celeste Mwangi had not broken in the mud at Quantico. She had not broken in the mountains of Afghanistan or the streets of Fallujah or the jungles of the Philippines. She would not break now. The radio crackled softly in her earpiece. Okonkwo's voice, barely above a whisper. Alpha 1, Overwatch. I have eyes on your position. Security patrol moving through the mangroves, bearing 045, approximately 300 meters from your location. Mwangi did not respond. Any transmission could give away her position. Instead, she slowly, carefully lowered herself deeper into the water. The surface rose past her shoulders, past her neck, until only her face remained above the waterline. Her rifle stayed elevated on the platform, but she was invisible now, just another shadow in the flooded swamp. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate, becoming still in a way that most humans could never achieve. This was what her father had taught her, what years of diving had perfected. The ability to exist in the space between breaths, to find the quiet place inside herself where fear and doubt could not reach. The patrol moved closer. She could hear them now, the splash of boots through shallow water, the murmur of voices speaking a language she did not understand. They were searching for her, sweeping the mangroves in a pattern designed to flush out any hidden threat. They would not find her. She was not hidden in the mangroves. She was part of them. The minutes stretched like hours. The patrol passed within 50 meters of her position, close enough that she could see the details of their equipment through the rain. Close enough that one wrong movement, one ripple in the water, would mean discovery and death. She did not move. She did not breathe. She simply existed, still as stone, patient as the tide. The patrol moved on, their voices fading into the storm. Only when Okonkwo confirmed they had cleared the area did Mwangi allow herself to surface, to take a long, slow breath of humid air. Alpha 1, Overwatch. Okonkwo's voice carried a mixture of relief and awe. That was too close. Close does not count, Mwangi replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. What is the status at the compound? Increased activity. Vehicles arriving, additional security taking positions. Volkov's people are nervous. Good. Nervous people make mistakes. She settled back into position, checking her rifle, confirming the platform would hold when the water inevitably rose higher. The patrol had been a test, and she had passed. But there would be more tests before this was over. There are always more tests. At the TOC, she knew Colonel Aldridge was moving against Kellerman. Nguyen had relayed fragments of the situation during brief radio checks. The evidence of Kellerman's communication with the unsecured frequency had been confirmed. He was being confined pending investigation, his career and legacy crumbling around him. Mwangi felt nothing about this news. No satisfaction, no vindication, no triumph. There would be time for those emotions later, after the mission was complete. Right now, she had room for only one thing in her mind. The target, the shot, the promise. Okonkwo's voice came again, softer now, almost gentle. Celeste, when this is over, when we're back at Tempest, I'm going to buy you the biggest steak they have at the Officers Club. She allowed herself a small smile, the first in hours. You hate the Officers Club. I hate watching my partner turn into a fish even more. His voice carried warmth despite the static. 3 hours to target window. You ready? Mwangi looked at the water rising around her, at the rifle waiting on its platform, at the compound in the distance where a monster would soon appear. I have been ready my whole life, she said. Now let me work. The rain continued to fall, and the water continued to rise, and Celeste Mwangi continued to wait. 2 hours to target window. The water had risen past Mwangi's chin, and she had adapted her position accordingly. Her body was almost entirely submerged now, only her face breaking the surface, her rifle resting on the platform inches above the waterline. She breathed in shallow, controlled sips, conserving energy, conserving oxygen, conserving everything for the moment that mattered. The compound had transformed over the past hour. Additional vehicles lined the perimeter, and security personnel moved with the tense efficiency of men expecting trouble. Volkov's helicopter sat on the pad like a metal insect, its rotors still, waiting to carry its master away once his business was concluded. He was here, somewhere inside that colonial villa. The man responsible for arming insurgents across 3 continents was preparing for a meeting that would put weapons in the hands of killers. And in less than 2 hours, if everything went according to plan, he would step onto that balcony and present himself to Mwangi's crosshairs. If everything went according to plan, in her experience, nothing ever did. The radio clicked twice in her ear. Okonkwo's signal that he had information, but could not speak freely. She waited, patient as the water around her, until his voice finally came through. Alpha 1, Overwatch. Another patrol forming at the compound gate. Looks like they're sweeping the perimeter again, wider pattern this time. They're going to push deeper into the mangroves. Mwangi calculated distances and timing. How long until they reach my position? 40 minutes, maybe less. They are moving faster than the last group. 40 minutes. The target window opened in 2 hours. If she moved now, she would lose her position and any hope of making the shot. If she stayed, she risked discovery by a patrol that was actively hunting her. There was a third option, the option she had been preparing for since the water first started rising. Overwatch, Alpha 1. I'm going to submerge. The silence on the radio stretched long enough that she thought the connection had dropped. Then Okonkwo's voice came back, tight with controlled emotion. Say again, Alpha 1. When the patrol approaches, I am going under. Completely. I have prepared a breathing tube from my kit. I can maintain position for up to 15 minutes submerged. Celeste, that is insane. It is necessary. Mwangi kept her voice calm, matter-of-fact. They are looking for a sniper in the mangroves. They are not looking for a shadow underwater. I go under when they get close. I stay down until they pass. I surface when it is clear. Simple. Nothing about this is simple. She almost smiled. No, but it is possible. That is all that matters. The next 40 minutes passed in a blur of preparation. Mwangi fashioned a breathing tube from components of her hydration pack, testing it repeatedly to ensure it would function when she needed it. She adjusted her platform, confirming her rifle would remain stable and dry even as she descended beneath the surface. She practiced the transition, the slow, controlled movement from surface to submerged position, until she could do it without creating a ripple. Her father's voice echoed in her memory as she worked. The ocean does not care if you are afraid of it. It only cares if you understand it. She understood. She had always understood. Overwatch to Alpha 1. Patrol is 100 meters out, bearing 030. They will reach your position in approximately 8 minutes. Copy, Overwatch. Going dark. Mwangi took 3 deep breaths, flooding her lungs with oxygen, slowing her heart rate to something barely above rest. She positioned the breathing tube, checked her rifle one final time, and then slowly, deliberately lowered herself beneath the surface. The world transformed. Sound became muffled, distant, irrelevant. Light filtered through the murky water in shifting patterns of gray and green. The warmth that had felt oppressive on the surface now felt almost comforting, like being wrapped in a blanket of silence. She found the still point inside herself, the place her father had shown her decades ago. The place where fear could not reach, where doubt dissolved like salt in the tide. She existed in that space, suspended between breaths, between heartbeats, between one moment and the next. Time lost meaning. She counted seconds in the rhythm of her slowing pulse, tracking the minutes as the patrol drew closer. Through the distortion of the water, she could hear the muffled splashing of boots, the distant murmur of voices. They were searching the mangroves directly above her position, their feet disturbing the water she hid within. One of them stopped less than 10 meters away. She could see the dark shadow of his legs through the murky water, could hear the garbled sound of his voice as he called to his companions. He was pointing at something. Her platform, her rifle. Mwangi did not move, did not breathe, did not exist. The shadow lingered for an eternity that lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Then it moved on, splashing through the shallows toward the next section of mangroves. The voices faded. The patrol passed. She waited another 2 minutes before surfacing, rising slowly through the water until her face broke the surface and she could finally breathe. Overwatch to Alpha 1. Okonkwo's voice cracked with relief. Patrol has cleared your position. They're moving south, away from the compound. Mwangi allowed herself one long, shuddering breath. Then she settled back into position, eye to the scope, finger beside the trigger guard. Copy, Overwatch. She checked the time. 1 hour to target window. What is the status at the compound? Moving on the second floor. Looks like they are preparing the meeting room. The balcony. Yes. Okonkwo paused. Celeste, they almost found you. Almost does not count, she said again, and this time she meant it. Get ready, Dante. We are almost there. The helicopter had brought more than Volkov. Through her scope, Mwangi watched a procession of men in expensive suits climb the steps to the villa, their bodyguards fanning out to reinforce the already substantial security presence. Buyers, the people who would distribute Volkov's weapons to every corner of the region, who would turn his merchandise into orphans and widows and mass graves. 30 minutes to target window. The water had risen above her mouth now, and she breathed through the tube she had fashioned, each breath a conscious effort of will. Her rifle remained dry on its platform, the scope clear, the barrel aligned with the second-floor balcony where Volkov would eventually appear. He would appear. Men like Volkov always did. They could not resist the theater of their own power, the need to stand above their domain and survey what they had built. He would step onto that balcony to show his buyers the view, to demonstrate his invulnerability, to prove that he was untouchable. And then Celeste Mwangi would touch him. Overwatch to Alpha 1. Okonkwo's voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might somehow alert the compound 900 meters away. Security is rotating. They're pulling men from the perimeter to the interior. Looks like the meeting is starting. Copy, Overwatch. Mwangi kept her eye pressed to the scope, tracking the movement of guards across the compound. What is the pattern? For guards on the balcony access points, 2 on the stairs, 2 on the ground floor exits. When he comes out, he will have a window of maybe 30 seconds before the interior guards can respond. 30 seconds. She had made shots in less time under worse conditions, but never from underwater. Never with a security team that knew she was coming. The minutes crawled past like wounded things. Mwangi felt the water lapping at her cheekbones, felt the strain in her neck from keeping her face above the surface. Her arms ached from hours of holding position. Her legs had gone numb somewhere around the 4th hour, and she had stopped trying to feel them. None of it mattered. Only the scope mattered. Only the shot. Overwatch to Alpha 1. Movement in the meeting room. Multiple figures approaching the balcony doors. Mwangi's heart rate, which had been hovering around 50 beats per minute for hours, jumped to 60. She forced it back down, forced her breathing to remain steady through the tube. Not yet. Wait for confirmation. Doors opening. 3 men stepping out. First is security. Second is... Okonkwo paused. Third man is Volkov. Confirmed visual on target. Through the scope, Mwangi saw him. Maxim Volkov was shorter than she expected, a compact man in a gray suit, his silver hair slicked back from a face that had seen too much sun and too little conscience. He moved to the balcony railing with the casual arrogance of a man who had never faced consequences for anything in his life. 900 meters. Wind from the southeast at approximately 15 knots. Rain falling at a steady rate. Not enough to significantly alter trajectory. The math assembled itself in her mind. Calculations her father had taught her before she was old enough to understand what they meant. Then the water rose another inch, and her scope dipped below the surface. Mwangi did not panic. Panic was a luxury she had abandoned long ago. Instead, she made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who had not spent their childhood learning to see beneath the waves. She submerged completely, taking the rifle with her. The world went dark and muffled. Through the water, the scope showed her a distorted image of the compound, the balcony, the target. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Light bends when it passes from water to air. Your eyes will lie to you. The math never lies. She adjusted her aim point, compensating for the refraction, for the angle, for every variable that the water introduced. The crosshairs settled on a point that looked wrong, that every instinct screamed was wrong, but the math said was right. Overwatch to Alpha 1. Okonkwo's voice came through the waterproof earpiece, distant and distorted. Security gap in 40 seconds. Interior guards are at maximum distance from balcony. Mwangi could not respond, could not move, could only hold her breath and her position and her faith in the calculations her father had drilled into her 2 decades ago. 30 seconds. Volkov was still at the railing, gesturing toward the ocean, showing off the view to his buyers. 20 seconds. The security guards shifted, their attention drawn to something inside the villa. 10 seconds. Her lungs burned. Her arms trembled. Her vision started to narrow at the edges. Take the shot, Okonkwo said. Take it now. Celeste Mwangi exhaled the last of her air in a stream of bubbles that rose toward a surface she could no longer see. In the stillness that followed, in the space between heartbeats where her father had taught her to live, she found the still point one final time. And she squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, punching through the water's surface and into the rain-soaked air beyond. 900 meters of wind and gravity and chaos lay between her and the target. 900 meters that felt like forever. 900 meters that passed in less than a second. Through the distorted lens of her submerged scope, Mwangi saw Maxim Volkov's body jerk once, and then crumple against the balcony railing. She saw the spray of red against the white colonial walls. She saw the security guards spinning, searching, raising their weapons toward a threat they could not find. She did not see any of this clearly. The water made everything blurry, uncertain, dreamlike. But she saw enough. Overwatch to Alpha 1. Okonkwo's voice cracked through the earpiece, breaking with emotion. Target down. Confirmed kill. Celeste, you did it. You actually did it. Mwangi surfaced slowly, gasping for air, her body shaking with exhaustion and cold, and something that felt almost like triumph. The compound below had erupted into chaos, guards running in every direction, but none of them were looking toward the flooded mangroves 900 meters away. No one hunted for shadows in the water. Copy, Overwatch, she managed between ragged breaths. Target eliminated. Beginning extraction. The bullet had traveled 900 meters in just over 1 second. In that single second, Celeste Mwangi had changed the calculus of arms trafficking across Southeast Asia. In that single second, she had proven wrong every man who had ever told her she did not belong. But seconds had a way of multiplying into minutes and minutes into hours, and right now, she needed to survive the next several of both. The compound below swarmed with activity. Guards poured out of the villa, their weapons raised, their heads swiveling as they searched for a threat they could not comprehend. They swept the treeline to the north, the beach to the south, the road to the west. None of them looked toward the flooded mangroves to the east. Why would they? No sniper in history had ever taken a shot from underwater. Mwangi began her extraction with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who understood that speed was the enemy of stealth. She secured her rifle to her pack, waterproof despite everything, and began pulling herself through the chest-deep water toward Okonkwo's position. Every motion was calculated to minimize ripples, to disturb nothing, to leave no trace that she had ever been there. The rain helped. It pounded the surface of the water, creating a constant chatter of droplets that masked any small sound she might make. The storm that had nearly killed her was now covering her escape. Overwatch to Alpha 1. Okonkwo's voice was steady now, professional, but she could hear the undercurrent of emotion beneath. You're clear to my position. No patrols between you and me. Security is focused entirely on the compound perimeter. Copy, Overwatch. En route. The 200 meters to Okonkwo's elevated position felt like 200 miles. Mwangi's body had been pushed beyond exhaustion hours ago, and now she was operating on something deeper than adrenaline, something more fundamental than willpower. She was operating on the promise she had made to herself when she was 19 years old, floating alone in the Atlantic. She would survive. She would always survive. Okonkwo met her at the base of the rock formation, his hands reaching down to pull her from the water. For a moment, they simply stood there, two soldiers who had been through something that neither of them fully understood yet. Then Okonkwo pulled her into an embrace, heedless of the water streaming off her gear. You actually shot underwater, he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. You actually made a 900-meter kill shot from beneath the surface of a flooded swamp. Mwangi allowed herself to lean into the embrace for just a moment. My father taught me, she said. It was all she could manage. They began moving toward the extraction point, Nguyen's team already en route to meet them. The jungle was easier now, the water receding as they climbed to higher ground. Behind them, the compound continued its chaos, sirens wailing, voices shouting, a machine spinning its gears in search of a ghost who had already vanished. The radio crackled. Papa 1 to Alpha 1. We have visual on your position. Extraction helicopter is 15 minutes out. What is your status? Alpha 1 copies. Target eliminated. We are mobile and en route to extraction point. Mwangi paused, then added, mission complete. The response came not from Nguyen, but from Colonel Aldridge, her voice cutting through on the command frequency. Alpha 1, Tempest 6 actual. I have been monitoring. Outstanding work, Gunnery Sergeant. Thank you, Colonel. There is something else you should know. Aldridge's voice carried a weight that made Mwangi slow her pace. Master Sergeant Kellerman has been detained. We have confirmed that he transmitted the warning to Volkov's security team. He is facing charges of compromising a classified operation and potentially treason. Mwangi felt nothing. Later, she knew there would be satisfaction. There would be vindication. But right now, standing in the rain-soaked jungle with her target dead and her mission complete, she could not summon the energy for anything beyond acknowledgement. Copy, Tempest 6. He almost killed you. Aldridge's voice softened slightly. His sabotage could have gotten you and Corporal Okonkwo killed. When you return to base, I want you to know that his actions will not be swept under the rug. He will face the full consequences of what he has done. I understand, Colonel. Mwangi started walking again, Okonkwo falling in a step beside her. But right now, I just want to get out of this jungle. Understood. Tempest 6 out. They reached the extraction point as the helicopter appeared over the tree line, its rotors beating against the storm. The Wind SEAL team was already there, forming a security perimeter. Their faces a mixture of professional focus and something that looked almost like awe. Nguyen himself approached Mwangi as the helicopter touched down. He did not speak at first, simply extended his hand. She took it, felt the firm grip of a warrior acknowledging another warrior. That was the most remarkable shot I have ever seen, he said. And I've seen a lot of shots. Mwangi shook her head. It was just math. No. Nguyen held her gaze. It was more than math. A lot more. The helicopter lifted them out of the jungle, rising above the canopy and banking toward FOB Tempest. Below, the compound had begun to calm, the security forces finally accepting that their target's killer had vanished like smoke. Volkov's body would be recovered. His buyers would scatter. His network would fracture and splinter and eventually collapse. One bullet, one shot, one woman who refused to be told what she could not do. Okonkwo sat beside her in the helicopter bay, his shoulder pressed against hers. You know this is going to be legendary, right? The underwater shot. They're going to teach this at sniper school. Mwangi closed her eyes, letting the exhaustion finally wash over her. Let them teach whatever they want, she said. I just want that steak you promised me. Okonkwo laughed, the sound nearly swallowed by the rotor wash. Officers' Club it is. The helicopter carried them home, and behind them, the monsoon finally began to break. The medical bay at FOB Tempest smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, and Mwangi had never been so grateful for anything in her life. The corpsman had diagnosed moderate hypothermia, dehydration, and exhaustion, none of which surprised her. What surprised her was that she was still conscious, still functional, still alive. 12 hours of 4 fluids and forced rest later, she felt almost human again. Colonel Aldridge arrived at 1800, her boots clicking against the tile floor with the measured cadence of an officer who had difficult things to say. She pulled a chair beside Mwangi's bed and sat down without ceremony. How are you feeling, Gunnery Sergeant? Like I spent 3 days in a swamp, Colonel. Mwangi managed a weak smile, which I suppose I did. Aldridge did not return the smile. Her face carried the weight of everything that had happened, every decision that had been made and unmade over the past 72 hours. I owe you an apology, she said. Mwangi blinked. Colonel, when Kellerman raised concerns about your assignment to this mission, I did not shut him down hard enough. I should have recognized his pattern earlier. I should have seen what he was doing. Aldridge's jaw tightened. Instead, I gave him enough latitude to nearly get you killed. With respect, Colonel, you also gave me the latitude to complete the mission. Mwangi pushed herself up against the pillows, ignoring the protest from her exhausted muscles. You trusted my judgment when it mattered. That is what I will remember. Aldridge studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. You know, when I was a lieutenant, there was a colonel who told me women did not belong in combat arms. He said we lacked the temperament, the physicality, the killer instinct. She paused. I spent 20 years proving him wrong. And now you are a colonel yourself. And now I'm a colonel myself. Aldridge leaned back in her chair. But I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone actively working against you. Someone inside your own house, sabotaging every step. I should have protected you better, Gunnery Sergeant. I will not make that mistake again. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Nguyen entered without waiting for permission, his usual composure replaced by something that looked almost like excitement. "Sorry to interrupt, Colonel, but I thought Gunnery Sergeant Mwangi would want to know." He held up a tablet. "Intelligence has finished their preliminary assessment. Volkov's network is collapsing. 3 of his buyers have been picked up trying to flee the country. 2 more are cooperating with local authorities. The weapons shipment he was brokering has been seized." Mwangi felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had not realized she was carrying. "How many weapons?" Nguyen checked the tablet. 1,800 assault rifles, 400 RPGs, 12 shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. Enough to arm a small insurgency for years. And now it is all off the market. "Now it is all off the market," Nguyen confirmed. "Because of one shot. One impossible shot that no one should have been able to make." Aldridge stood, smoothing her uniform. "Speaking of that shot," she said, "I have submitted your name for the Silver Star. What you accomplished out there goes beyond exceptional marksmanship. It was valor of the highest order." Mwangi shook her head. "I was just doing my job, Colonel." "No." Aldridge's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You were doing something no one else could have done. You were doing something most people would not have even attempted. That deserves recognition." After the colonel left, Nguyen lingered by the door. His usual professional detachment had softened into something more personal. "My team wants to train with you," he said, "when you are recovered. They have never seen anyone with your capabilities in the water." "I'm not a SEAL, Commander." "No, you're something else entirely." Nguyen smiled, a rare expression on his weathered face. "Whatever that is, we want to learn from it." He left, and Mwangi was alone with the hum of medical equipment and the weight of everything that had happened. She reached for the waterproof pouch that still hung around her neck, extracting the photograph inside. Her father's face looked back at her, frozen in a moment of joy from a summer afternoon decades ago. "I did it, Papa," she whispered. "I found the still point, just like you taught me." The door opened again, and Okonkwo entered carrying 2 styrofoam containers. The smell of grilled meat filled the room. "Officers' Club was closed," he said, settling into the chair Aldridge had vacated. "But I bribed the mess sergeant. It is not exactly filet mignon, but it is the best I could do on short notice." Mwangi took the container, feeling the warmth seep into her hands. "It is perfect." They ate in comfortable silence, 2 soldiers who had survived something extraordinary together. Outside the window, the sky had finally cleared, stars visible for the first time in days. The monsoon had passed. "I heard about the Silver Star," Okonkwo said between bites. "You deserve it. We both deserve it." Mwangi set down her fork. "I could not have made that shot without you calling my window, without you staying out there in the rain, watching my back." He shrugged, but she could see the pride beneath his casual demeanor. "That is what spotters do. That is what partners do." The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Okonkwo nodded slowly, and Mwangi knew that whatever came next, wherever their careers took them, they would face it together. Through the window, a single star burned brighter than the others, and Mwangi let herself believe it was her father, watching over her from wherever the current had finally carried him home. 3 months later, the morning sun broke over the mountains of Quantico with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything feel possible. Gunnery Sergeant Celeste Mwangi stood at the edge of the training pool, watching a new class of Scout sniper candidates prepare for their water qualification exercise. There were 18 of them this cycle, 16 men and 2 women. The women stood slightly apart from the others, the way Mwangi herself had stood apart 13 years ago. She recognized the tension in their shoulders, the careful neutrality in their expressions, the way they held themselves like they expected to be challenged at any moment. She had worn that same armor once. She still wore it sometimes. Gunnery Sergeant. One of the male candidates approached, a lance corporal with eager eyes and a surname she did not recognize. "Is it true what they say about the Monsoon shot?" Mwangi turned to face him, keeping her expression neutral. "What do they say, Lance Corporal?" He swallowed, suddenly uncertain. "They say you took out a target at 900 meters while completely submerged. They say you held your breath for 3 minutes and made the shot underwater." Around the pool, the other candidates had stopped their preparations to listen. Even the two women had drawn closer, their careful neutrality replaced by something that looked almost like hope. Mwangi let the silence stretch for a moment. Then she nodded. That is what happened. The Lance Corporal's eyes went wide. How is that even possible? It is possible because someone taught me that the water is not your enemy. Mwangi looked out over the pool, seeing not the chlorinated training facility, but a flooded mangrove swamp 9,000 miles away. It is possible because I spent my whole life learning to find stillness in chaos. She turned back to the candidates. And it is possible because I refused to let anyone tell me what I could not do. She walked to the edge of the pool and stepped in without hesitation, the water rising to her chest. The candidates watched in silence as she demonstrated the breathing techniques, the positioning, the mental discipline required to shoot accurately from a submerged position. She showed them how light bent at the interface between water and air, how to compensate for the refraction, how to trust the math when every instinct screamed that the aim point was wrong. When she finally emerged, the two female candidates were waiting. The taller one spoke first. Gunnery Sergeant, I heard that someone tried to sabotage your mission, that someone inside your own chain of command wanted you to fail. Mwangi considered the question. Master Sergeant Kellerman had been court-martialed 6 weeks ago. The charges included dereliction of duty, conduct unbecoming, and transmitting classified information to unauthorized parties. He had been stripped of his rank, his benefits, and his freedom. He was currently serving the first year of a 12-year sentence at the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth. She had not attended the trial. She had not needed to. There will always be people who want you to fail, she said finally. People who look at you and see everything they are afraid of. People who would rather watch you drown than admit you can swim. She met the young woman's eyes. Your job is not to convince them. Your job is to be so good that their opinions become irrelevant. The shorter woman spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Did you ever think about quitting? Mwangi thought about the water rising around her in that flooded hide, the cold seeping in her bones, the voice on the radio telling her to abort. She thought about her father's hand growing slack in hers as the current pulled him down. Every day, she said, I think about quitting every single day. She paused, letting the truth of that sink in. And every single day, I choose to keep going. That is the only difference between people who succeed and people who do not. The successful ones keep choosing. The training continued through the morning, and Mwangi found herself watching the two women more closely than the others. They struggled with some exercises, excelled at others, and maintained the kind of quiet determination that she recognized from her own reflection. They would face obstacles that their male counterparts would never have to confront. They would be questioned and doubted and dismissed, and some of them would persevere anyway. That afternoon, she drove to the cemetery outside Wilmington where her father was buried. The headstone was simple, just his name and dates, and a small engraving of a wave. She had not visited since before the deployment, and the guilt of that absence sat heavy in her chest. She knelt in the grass and placed her old spotter's scope at the base of the stone. It was the scope he had given her when she was 12, the one she had used to watch dolphins from his research boat, the one that had started her on the path that led to a flooded swamp and an impossible shot. I'm teaching now, Papa, she said quietly, training the next generation. Some of them are women. Some of them remind me of myself. She touched the cold granite, tracing the letters of his name. I tell them about you, about the stillness, about trusting the math. I tell them that the water is not their enemy. The wind stirred the trees above her, and for a moment she could almost hear his voice in the rustle of leaves. I tell them that the only thing that matters is refusing to give up. She stood, brushing grass from her knees. I tell them that impossible is just a word people use when they are afraid to try. She left the scope at his grave and walked back to her car. Tomorrow there would be more training, more candidates, more opportunities to pass on what she had learned. Tomorrow there would be new challenges and new obstacles and new voices telling her what she could not do. And tomorrow, just like every day before, she would prove them wrong. If this story moved you, Share your thoughts about your favorite moment or what resonated with you. Maybe you know someone who found strength in the lessons their parents taught them, or someone who refused to let anyone else define their limits.